Have you ever stopped and asked yourself a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding? What if the greatest obstacle standing between you and the life you dream of was never the world? What if it wasn't bad luck? Not your past, not your family, not your circumstances, but something much closer, something that has followed you since childhood, whispering quietly beneath every important decision you've ever made. A voice so familiar, you no longer recognize it as a voice at all. You simply call it me. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what you're about to discover may completely change how you understand failure, success, motivation, and even your own identity. Most people believe they sabotage themselves because they're lazy, because they lack discipline, because they aren't motivated enough. But psychology paints a very different picture. The human mind almost never works against itself without a reason. Behind every postponed dream, every abandoned opportunity, every broken promise you make to yourself, there is usually an invisible protector, a hidden psychological mechanism that believes it's keeping you safe. Imagine standing at the edge of a beautiful bridge. On the other side lies everything you've ever wanted: confidence, freedom, love, purpose, the career you've imagined, the life you've promised yourself you'll start one day. You take one step forward, and suddenly your chest tightens. Your thoughts become louder. What if I fail? What if people laugh? What if I'm not good enough? So you turn around. You tell yourself you'll try again tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next year. Eventually, you convince yourself you never really wanted it anyway. This is the silent architecture of self-sabotage. It rarely announces itself with dramatic words. Instead, it disguises itself as logic, as caution, as perfectionism, as waiting for the right moment. But beneath each excuse lies the same invisible force: fear. Not always fear of failure. Sometimes, something even more surprising: fear of becoming the person you're capable of being. Psychologists have long observed a fascinating paradox. Human beings possess an extraordinary desire to grow. Yet at the same time, we possess an equally powerful desire to remain psychologically safe. These two forces constantly pull against one another. One whispers, "Become." The other whispers, "Stay where it's familiar." And the familiar almost always wins, because the brain was never designed to make you extraordinary. Its first responsibility is much simpler: keep you alive. For thousands of years, survival depended on avoiding uncertainty. Anything unfamiliar could mean danger. New environments, new people, new risks. Even success could bring unwanted attention. Our ancestors survived because cautious brains often lived longer than fearless ones. Although the modern world has changed dramatically, our nervous system still carries echoes of that ancient reality. Today, the danger is rarely a predator hiding in the darkness. Instead, it's an interview, a difficult conversation, starting a business, publishing your first book, speaking in front of strangers, falling in love, being vulnerable. The brain cannot always distinguish between physical danger and emotional uncertainty. Both activate similar alarm systems. Both convince you to retreat. And retreat feels strangely comforting. Not because retreat leads to happiness, but because it temporarily reduces anxiety. This is where one of psychology's most powerful hidden loops begins. You avoid something uncomfortable. Your anxiety immediately decreases. Your brain rewards the avoidance. Without realizing it, you've trained yourself to escape. The next challenge arrives. You avoid again. The relief returns. Each repetition strengthens the habit. Until eventually, avoidance no longer feels like a choice. It feels like your personality. You begin saying things like, "I'm just not confident. I'm not disciplined. I'm always like this." But these aren't permanent truths. They're learned survival strategies. The remarkable thing about the human mind is that it learns incredibly quickly. Unfortunately, it doesn't always learn what helps us thrive. It learns whatever reduces discomfort in the present moment. This is why temporary comfort can become permanent suffering. Every excuse feels harmless. Every delay feels reasonable. Every compromise feels small. Yet over time, they quietly shape an identity. Not because you chose that identity, but because your brain kept collecting evidence. I didn't apply. I didn't speak. I didn't try. I stayed silent. Eventually, the mind reaches a dangerous conclusion. This must simply be who I am. Identity is rarely built through one dramatic event. It's built through thousands of repeated experiences. Each action becomes evidence. Each avoidance becomes another brick. Slowly, carefully, your subconscious constructs a prison. And the most tragic part, the prison doesn't have visible walls. It exists entirely inside your perception. Psychologist Albert Bandura devoted decades to studying something he called self-efficacy. He discovered that people's beliefs about what they are capable of often influence their behavior more than their actual abilities. Two people can possess the same intelligence, the same opportunities, the same education, yet one transforms their life, while the other never even begins. The difference isn't talent, it's belief. Not the kind of belief spoken aloud in motivational speeches. The quieter kind, the unconscious expectations buried beneath awareness. The beliefs that silently answer questions like, what happens if I succeed? What happens if I fail? What kind of person am I allowed to become? Most of us never consciously ask these questions, yet our subconscious answers them every single day. Every decision, every hesitation, every excuse is simply another sentence in a story we've been telling ourselves for years. The strange thing is, we often become so attached to these stories that changing them feels like losing ourselves. Even painful identities become comfortable. Someone who has believed they are the shy one for 20 years may unconsciously resist becoming confident. Not because confidence is undesirable, but because it threatens a familiar identity. The unknown, even when beautiful, still feels unknown, and the brain has always preferred a painful certainty over an uncertain possibility. Perhaps this explains one of life's greatest mysteries. Why people sometimes destroy the very things they've spent years trying to build. Why relationships end just as intimacy deepens. Why opportunities disappear the moment success comes within reach. Why dreams collapse not at the beginning, but near the finish line. It isn't because these people don't want happiness. It's because part of them believes happiness is unsafe. And until that hidden belief is brought into the light, the cycle quietly repeats itself. Again, and again, and again. But every cycle, no matter how deeply rooted, can be understood. And what can be understood can eventually be transformed. So where does this invisible force begin? Where does the voice inside your head learn to say, "You're not enough. Don't take the risk. Stay small"? Contrary to what many people believe, you weren't born doubting yourself. You weren't born believing you were incapable. A newborn child doesn't question whether they're worthy of love. They don't hesitate before taking their first steps because they're afraid of looking foolish. They fall. They stand. They try again. Over and over. Failure means nothing to them because they haven't yet learned to attach their identity to the outcome. Somewhere along the way, that changes. Very slowly. Almost invisibly. The world begins handing you mirrors. Not mirrors made of glass, but mirrors made of words. You should behave. Don't embarrass yourself. Why can't you be more like your brother? You're so shy. You're too sensitive. You're not trying hard enough. Most of these words were never intended to hurt you. Many came from parents doing their best, teachers trying to guide, friends repeating what they themselves had learned. Yet the developing brain doesn't separate intention from meaning. It simply absorbs, like soft clay receiving an imprint. During childhood, the brain is astonishingly adaptable. Neuroscientists call this heightened flexibility neuroplasticity. It's the reason children learn languages so easily. It's also the reason emotional experiences leave such deep impressions. Every repeated experience teaches the brain something about the world. If you're consistently encouraged, your nervous system begins expecting support. If you're repeatedly criticized, your brain may begin expecting rejection. Over time, expectations quietly transform into beliefs, and beliefs become identity. This process happens so gradually that most people never notice it. Imagine a young child proudly showing a drawing to an adult. They're smiling, excited, hopeful. The adult barely looks up and says, "That's nice," before returning to work. To the adult, it's an ordinary moment. To the child, it might become something much larger. My efforts don't matter. I'm invisible. If I want attention, I have to be perfect. One experience alone rarely shapes a lifetime, but repeated emotional patterns often do. Psychologists refer to these deeply rooted patterns as core beliefs. Core beliefs are not opinions. They're assumptions that feel unquestionably true. Not because they're accurate, but because they've been repeated for years. They sound like this: I have to earn love. I always disappoint people. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I'll eventually be abandoned. The remarkable thing about these beliefs is that they operate beneath conscious awareness. You rarely wake up and say, "Today I'll let my fear of rejection control my decisions." Instead, the belief quietly influences your behavior from behind the curtain. You don't speak during the meeting. You don't express your feelings. You don't apply for the opportunity. You don't ask the question. Afterward, your conscious mind invents a logical explanation. I wasn't ready. It wasn't the right time. They probably weren't interested anyway. But psychology suggests something deeper may have happened. Your subconscious simply protected a belief it already expected to be true. If you secretly believe you'll be rejected, avoiding vulnerability protects you from testing that belief. Because if you never try, you never have to discover whether the belief is false. It sounds irrational, yet it's one of the mind's most elegant survival strategies. The human brain often values consistency more than happiness. Think about that for a moment. Consistency, even painful consistency, because consistency feels predictable, and predictability feels safe. This explains why people sometimes remain in unhealthy relationships, stay in unfulfilling careers, or repeat destructive habits for decades, not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering has become familiar. The familiar can feel strangely comforting, even when it hurts. Psychologist John Bowlby spent years studying how early relationships shape the way we experience ourselves and others. His work on attachment revealed that our earliest emotional bonds often become templates for future relationships. If love felt secure, we're more likely to trust. If love felt unpredictable, we may constantly expect abandonment. If affection depended on achievement, we may spend adulthood believing we must constantly prove our worth. Without realizing it, many adults are still responding to emotional lessons they learned decades ago. Not because those lessons are true, but because the nervous system remembers. The body remembers, long before the conscious mind understands. This is why certain situations trigger emotion that seem far larger than the moment itself. A simple disagreement feels like rejection. Constructive feedback feels like humiliation. Silence feels like abandonment. The present awakens echoes from the past. And suddenly, you're no longer responding only to today's experience. You're responding to years of accumulated emotional memory. This is one reason self-sabotage feels so confusing. The behavior belongs to the present, but the fear often belongs to the past. Imagine carrying an old map through a city that has completely changed. The streets have moved. The buildings have disappeared. New roads have been built. Yet every day, you continue following the outdated map. Not because you're foolish, because you trust it. Your subconscious operates much the same way. It builds maps early in life. Maps about people, about danger, about love, about success, about yourself. Then it keeps using those maps, long after the world has changed. Perhaps today, you are surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. Yet an old emotional map still whispers, "Don't trust anyone." Perhaps incredible opportunities stand before you. Yet another map quietly says, "People like you don't succeed." The tragedy isn't that these maps exist. The tragedy is believing they're reality. They're not. They're memories. They're interpretations. They're survival strategies written by a younger version of you, who was simply trying to make sense of the world. And that younger version deserves compassion, not blame, because they did exactly what every human mind is designed to do: adapt. The question is no longer, "Why am I like this?" The better question is, do the beliefs that once protected me still belong in the life I'm trying to create? Because every chapter of your life requires a different version of yourself. And sometimes, the very beliefs that helped you survive yesterday become the chains that prevent you from living tomorrow. The moment you recognize those chains, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop fighting yourself. You stop calling yourself lazy, weak, broken. Instead, you begin seeing your mind for what it truly is. Not an enemy, but an old protector that has simply forgotten. The danger has passed. If the mind is trying to protect you, why does it often become your greatest obstacle? Why does the very system designed to ensure your survival sometimes keep you from truly living? The answer lies in one of the brain's oldest priorities: consistency. More than happiness, more than success, more than fulfillment. Your brain craves consistency because consistency allows it to predict what comes next, and prediction conserves energy. Imagine walking into your home in complete darkness. You don't need to think about where the couch is or where the stairs begin. Your brain already knows. It has created an internal map. The same thing happens with your thoughts. The beliefs you've repeated for years become familiar pathways, like trails through a forest. The more often you walk them, the wider they become. Eventually, your mind follows them automatically. This is why changing your life often feels exhausting. You're not simply learning something new. You're asking your brain to abandon an old path and carve a completely new one. That requires effort, and the brain naturally resists unnecessary effort. Not because it wants you to fail, because efficiency has always been one of its greatest strengths. But sometimes, efficiency becomes a prison. Psychologists describe another fascinating process called confirmation bias. It's one of the most powerful invisible forces shaping human experience. Confirmation bias is the brain's tendency to notice evidence that supports existing beliefs, while quietly overlooking evidence that contradicts them. Imagine two people entering the exact same room. One believes, "People usually like me." The other believes, "No one wants me here." Nothing about the room changes. The conversations are identical. The faces are the same. Yet each person leaves with completely different conclusions. One remembers the smiles. The other remembers the moments of silence. One notices acceptance. The other notices every tiny sign of rejection. Neither person is lying. Their brains simply filtered reality differently. The world outside remained the same. The world inside determined what was seen. This is why changing beliefs is so difficult. Because your beliefs don't merely influence your thoughts. They influence what information reaches your awareness. Your subconscious is constantly asking, "What evidence supports the story I already believe?" And remarkably, it usually finds plenty. If you believe you're unlucky, every disappointment becomes proof. If you believe you're incapable, every mistake strengthens the story. Soon, the belief feels undeniable, not because it's objectively true, but because your attention has been collecting evidence for it for years. The psychologist Aaron T. Beck, one of the pioneers of cognitive therapy, observed that our deepest beliefs shape automatic thoughts before we're even aware of them. A single event occurs. Almost instantly, the mind interprets it. Then emotion follows. Not because the event itself created the emotion, but because the interpretation came first. Imagine sending an important message. And hours pass without a reply. One person thinks, "They must be busy." They remain calm. Another thinks, "I've done something wrong." Anxiety immediately appears. The event was identical. Only the interpretation changed. And yet, the emotional experience became completely different. This is one of psychology's most profound discoveries. Our suffering often comes less from reality, and more from the meanings we automatically assign to it. But perhaps the most deceptive force of all is the inner critic. Almost everyone has one. Few people recognize where it came from. Listen carefully to your thoughts the next time you make a mistake. Notice the language. "You're so stupid." "You always ruin everything." You'll never change. Would you ever speak to a child that way? Would you say those words to someone you love? Probably not. Yet many people repeat them silently, every single day. The strange thing is, those words rarely originated with you. They were borrowed, collected over years, perhaps from a parent whose own fears were never healed, a teacher who confused criticism with motivation, a culture that measured worth by achievement. Over time, those outside voices became your inside voice. Eventually, you stopped questioning it. You simply assumed, this must be who I am. But here's the remarkable truth. A thought repeated 1,000 times does not become a fact. It merely becomes familiar. Psychologists often distinguish between thoughts and reality. Yet most of us spend our lives treating every thought as absolute truth. Imagine sitting beside a river. Leaves float across the surface. Some are large, some small, some disappear almost immediately. Your thoughts behave much the same way. They arise, they pass, unless you climb onto one. The moment you identify with every thought, you become carried away by it. One anxious prediction becomes certainty. One fearful assumption becomes identity. One harsh judgment becomes self-image. Before long, your entire emotional world is being directed by thoughts you never consciously chose. Mindfulness researchers have found that learning to observe thoughts, instead of automatically believing them, can reduce emotional reactivity and improve psychological well-being. Not because negative thoughts disappear, but because your relationship to them changes. You begin realizing something extraordinary. You are not every thought that enters your mind. You are the awareness that notices them. And awareness creates choice. Without awareness, old patterns continue automatically. With awareness, a tiny gap appears. Within that gap, something powerful is born. Freedom. The freedom to question. The freedom to pause. The freedom to ask, is this thought actually true? Where did it come from? Is it helping me become the person I want to be? Those questions may seem simple, but they quietly weaken patterns that have existed for decades. Every transformation begins there. Not with changing the world, not with forcing yourself to become someone else, but with becoming aware of the invisible stories that have been shaping your life all along. Because the moment you can see the script, you are no longer trapped inside the character. You become something far more powerful. The author, and every author, has the ability to write a different ending. But there is another secret, one that surprises even psychologists. Not everyone sabotages themselves because they fear failure. Some sabotage themselves because they fear success. At first, that sounds impossible. After all, isn't success what everyone wants? Money, freedom, recognition, love, purpose. If that's true, why would anyone run from it? Because success doesn't just change your circumstances. It changes your identity. And identity is one of the most protected parts of the human mind. Imagine spending your entire life believing you're ordinary, invisible, someone who stays in the background. Then suddenly, an opportunity appears. A promotion. A business begins to grow. Your work receives attention. People start looking to you for answers. Your life begins to change. From the outside, it seems like a dream. But inside, something unexpected happens. Your heart races. Your thoughts become louder. What if I can't keep this up? What if everyone realizes I'm not as capable as they think? What if I lose everything? The very future you've prayed for begins to feel frightening. Not because it's bad, because it's unfamiliar. This experience has a name. Psychologists often refer to it as impostor syndrome. It affects students, artists, entrepreneurs, scientists, even world leaders. No matter how much evidence of success surrounds them, they quietly believe they've somehow fooled everyone. Soon, someone will discover the truth. Soon, they'll be exposed. Ironically, the more they achieve, the stronger this fear can become. Success doesn't silence self-doubt. Sometimes, it amplifies it. Why? Because old beliefs don't disappear simply because your circumstances improve. If you've carried the belief, "I'm not good enough," for 20 years, your subconscious won't suddenly erase it after one achievement. Instead, it searches desperately for evidence that the old story is still true. Every mistake becomes proof. Every criticism feels devastating. Every challenge confirms the fear. And without realizing it, many people begin shrinking themselves. They procrastinate, miss opportunities, delay important decisions, not because they lack ability, because failing feels safer than succeeding and being exposed. The mind believes it's protecting them from future humiliation. But protection slowly becomes limitation. There is another companion to self-sabotage, one that often disguises itself as ambition. Perfectionism. Most people admire perfectionists. They seem hardworking, responsible, committed to excellence. But beneath perfectionism, psychologists often find something much deeper: fear. Because perfectionism is rarely about achieving perfection. It's about avoiding judgment. Imagine a painter standing before a blank canvas. They have extraordinary talent. They've imagined the masterpiece for months. Yet they never make the first brushstroke. Why? Because as long as the painting exists only in imagination, it cannot fail. It cannot be criticized. It cannot disappoint. The blank canvas feels safer than an imperfect beginning. This is the hidden tragedy of perfectionism. It promises excellence, but often produces paralysis. The perfect moment never arrives. The perfect plan is never complete. The perfect version of yourself remains forever in the future. Meanwhile, life quietly moves on. The years pass. Dreams remain unopened. Potential stays hidden beneath endless preparation. The psychologist Carol Dweck has spent decades studying how beliefs about ability influence achievement. Her research suggests that people who believe their abilities can grow through effort tend to embrace challenges. Mistakes become information. Failure becomes feedback. Growth becomes possible. But those who believe ability is fixed often experience something very different. Every setback feels personal. Every mistake threatens identity. Failure doesn't mean, "I need another strategy." It becomes, "I am the problem." When identity becomes attached to performance, every challenge feels like a courtroom. Every outcome becomes a verdict on your worth. No wonder the mind begins avoiding difficult situations. Not because you're weak, because your self-worth has unknowingly been placed on trial. Think about how many dreams disappear. Not because people lack talent, but because they become exhausted trying to protect an identity that was never meant to carry such weight. The truth is, Your worth has never depended on flawless performance. A child learning to walk falls hundreds of times. No one calls them a failure. No one tells them, perhaps walking just isn't for you. We encourage them. Celebrate each attempt. Understand that falling is part of learning. Somehow, as adults, we forget this wisdom. We begin believing that mistakes should disappear. That uncertainty is weakness. That confidence comes before action. But psychology suggests the opposite. Confidence often comes because of action, not before it. Every courageous step teaches the nervous system something new. I survived. I learned. I'm stronger than I believed. Over time, the brain begins updating its internal predictions. What once felt terrifying becomes manageable. What once seemed impossible becomes familiar. This is how transformation actually happens. Not through one dramatic breakthrough, but through countless moments where courage quietly outweighs fear, even if only by a single step. Perhaps the greatest lie self-sabotage ever tells is that you must become fearless before you begin. But courage has never meant the absence of fear. It means refusing to let fear become your identity. Because fear is an emotion, not a destiny, a visitor, not a permanent resident. And every time you choose action, despite uncertainty, you send your brain a message more powerful than any affirmation. I am no longer living by the rules of my old story. That message, repeated often enough, becomes the beginning of an entirely new identity. One built not on fear, but on possibility. One decision at a time. And so, we arrive at the most important question of all. If self-sabotage is not your enemy, then what is it? Perhaps it is simply an old version of yourself, still trying to protect you. A younger mind, doing exactly what it once needed to do in order to survive. For years, it whispered, "Stay small. Don't take the risk. Don't let anyone see the real you." Not because it wanted to destroy your future, but because it feared losing your safety. But life has a strange way of asking us the same question, again and again, until we finally answer it differently. Will you continue living according to the fears of your past? Or will you begin creating your future through the choices you make today? Remember, your thoughts are not commands. Your fears are not prophecies. And your past is not a life sentence. Every belief you've carried was learned, and what has been learned can be questioned. What can be questioned can be changed. Neuroscience reminds us that the brain continues to adapt throughout life. Every new experience, every courageous decision, every compassionate thought strengthens new neural pathways. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens quietly. One decision, one habit, one act of courage at a time. The next time your mind whispers, "You're not ready," pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is this the voice of my highest self, or the echo of an old fear? Because there is a profound difference. One voice expands your life. The other keeps you trapped inside yesterday. You were never meant to spend your life proving your worth. You were meant to discover that your worth was never missing. It has been there, beneath every doubt, every fear, every failed attempt, waiting patiently for you to remember it. Perhaps the greatest victory is not becoming someone new. Perhaps it is finally releasing everything that convinced you you were someone less. So, as you leave this moment, don't ask yourself, how can I stop sabotaging my life? Instead, ask, what kind of person do I become when fear is no longer making my decisions? Sit with that question. Let it follow you, because the answer won't simply change your thoughts. It may change the direction of your entire life. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. What belief has been silently holding you back? Was it the belief that you're not capable, that you're not worthy, that it's already too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You never know. Your story may become the spark that helps someone else break free from their own invisible prison. If you enjoy exploring the hidden depths of psychology, the mysteries of the human mind, and the timeless wisdom that helps us understand ourselves, then subscribe to Ancient Whisper and join us on this journey. Here, we don't simply seek knowledge. We seek understanding, because understanding is the beginning of transformation. Until our next journey together, keep listening, not only to the whispers of the ancient world, but to the quiet wisdom that has always existed within you. Sometimes, the most powerful whisper is the one that finally tells you, you are free.